Hey, what's up, good people? Welcome to the FiredUp show. This is your host, Ganga. We are on a virtual session, and when we go virtual in person, it's always fire because it's Fired Up KC. But welcome to this episode. Man, I am excited for the guest we have today, and also I want to bring back the one and only. I have my co-host here with me, the legendary Mr. Caleb Roy. How you doing,
Was
Caleb?
good, Joe. Was good.
It's been so long,
It's
man.
all love.
Glad to have you back. We're about to tap it up, about to get it on. You already know.
Yes, sir.
Now make welcome the one and only the founder of he is passionate about Decacerating the United States. This man is awesome, entrepreneur, intelligent. Make welcome Mr. J in the house.
Pew 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 pew.
How you doing? How
What's
you
up,
doing?
man?
Good to have
I'm
you on the
good. I'm
show.
good.
What's
Good.
Good
up?
to have you on the show. Definitely good to have you on the show.
Yes,
Excited
sir.
to conversate with you. How's your day been so far?
It's been varied, bro. We've got our hands on a lot of projects. So, like the very first thing that I touched this morning was our testing and our vaccination push in low-income neighborhoods, and then all the way up to criminal justice reform stuff, projects we're working on in Atlanta. In
Okay.
KC, you know the deal. It's been all over the place, but
Yes, yes. Wow. Uh,
Wow.
for those who do not know who Jay Austin is, can I give them a bio about yourself, about your project, and your passion with making sure that we have lesser people in prisons, making sure that the criminal justice department is equal for everyone. Can I give people a bio about yourself?
yeah, man. So not long ago, I was running a video production agency, and one of our projects had to do with what we called the opportunity gap, and we were researching a lot about the topic because we were going to put it into documentary form. And in the course of that research, I had read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Y'all ever read that?
Yes. Caleb has
Hey,
already had
I got the book,
he
man.
came with it.
Yeah,
I pulled it out the library. I was like, okay.
yeah, yeah. So that's one of the most persuasive books about mass incarceration in the U.S. in this generation of it. And so I was reading that book, and it was to me kind of like a fish learning that it's wet,
Mm,
right? It's
Mm,
like, oh, I've grown up around this my entire life, but I didn't understand that this is how it worked. And at that point in time, I put it down in my idea journal that that was something that I was going to pursue.
right.
And another year passed, and at that point in time, the video agency was evolving, and I decided to get out of it and go full time into decarceration mode. And decarceration basically means keeping people out of prison, getting people out of prison, and preventing them from going back. And so that's when I launched an agency with my initials on it, JWA, because the topic was so important that I wanted to put my name behind it.
yes.
And we started what we're doing today.
Wow. Man, that is just a fantastic story. Now, uh, kind of give us just a background story of what it meant for you to make that transition and the grind you had to put in to be able to see this vision of yours come true.
Well, I think I realized pretty early on that we got to mass incarceration through racist ideologies, through bad policies, and through poverty. And I can't solve all that, right?
Yeah.
So when I looked at like where my skill set would be most effective, it had to be in the ideology portion of it because the ideology persuades the policy.
Yeah.
The policy changes the poverty. And since my background was in storytelling, I just kind of broke it down. I was like, well, where do these ideologies come from? Well, they come from stories that we've told ourselves. Not
Mm,
necessarily that we've been told, but what we tell ourselves.
right.
And so then I started thinking, well, how do we change the stories that we tell ourselves? Well, we hear better stories, right? We got to be exposed to these sorts of stories
Yeah.
to even start walking down that path. And that's when I started to frame my fight against mass incarceration as a fight of ideas, a war of ideas. And so that's why when I looked at the market and who was doing what in criminal justice reform, I just started taking note about how good they were at storytelling and marketing in general.
Wow.
How did they look? What was their voice like? Were they effective? Did they run effective campaigns? And when I saw that enough of them were doing poorly, then I was like, okay, that's where I'm going to step in right away and start getting clients. And that just so happened that that was like just in time, unfortunately, for George Floyd's murder. And
Wow.
so once that happened, it got real. Sorry.
Right.
On our end, and we actually got a lot of clients, and not from Black people or Mexicans or Latinos, but we started getting a lot of calls from white people during the summer trying to figure out what role they played in all this. If they played a role, did they contribute to it? If so, how can they contribute to the end of it? And that's when we launched our insights portion of the agency. And that's all meant to guide people who are new to the topic of mass incarceration, decarceration, and reform. We guide them on how to get started, how to get active with it.
Wow. Let me just touch upon that. For those who don't know the book, you're talking about the new Jim Crow. So go get a copy of this book right here. Just as you said, just pretty much an awakening. Honestly, it's just like you crawling before you walk. You're not sure what you're doing, but you know you're advancing in something. And I like the fact that you put your tools to work as far as your marketing and utilizing your benefits that you're gifted with and put it in a niche where now you're becoming a successful person and honestly waking other people up to this industry.
Yeah, Jay, man, yeah, I think everyone definitely needs to get that book. Jay, can I give us a little insight? What are the things, if you can remember, that really struck you hard when you read this book?
The intentionality of how the system was designed by people in power at that time was the thing that struck me, and how intentional it was for the leaders of that time, the policymakers of that time, to create this invisible system that is kept out of sight but is there all the time, that essentially propagated and perpetuated the effects
on social media or
of
different
not just
platforms,
slavery,
seem to
but
be this argument
what followed
on the
after the
left or on the
failed
right.
Reconstruction era in the
people,
US.
who either
You
agree or
know,
disagree
essentially
with it.
it
But
became
you
a
being,
tool, and
someone
this is
who
something
has
Michelle Alexander points
dove
out
deep
really
into
well,
this
but
topic,
the system
what are people
became a
missing when they're
tool
arguing
to
against each
keep
other?
people
What
in their
is the
place
foundation for
and to
what you're standing
also
for?
make it seem as if it wasn't
Well, I
racist.
think
And
we
that's
tend
one
to
of
have really bad
the most difficult
conversations about the
conversations that
most
we get to
complex
have with
systems.
people is,
And
you know, they talk
mass
about, like, if they're
incarceration,
not
the criminal justice
a
system as a
black or
whole,
brown
is an
person,
extremely
right? And
complex
they're looking
system.
at, they're like, so prove
So,
to me that the
what I mean by
system is
that
racist.
is
And the
the
only
way
thing
that
that
a
we have to
complex
go off
system
of a lot of
works
times is
is
like the stats.
when you push
Oh,
this
we're
button,
overrepresented, we're
then that
overrepresented, we're
button pops out.
overrepresented.
When you cut that
We'll play
string,
with stats all day.
another
We know them
string
off
is
the top of our
formed.
head.
You pull
But
that
the most
lever, another one
compelling
pops up. So there's not
story
one move
around
within a
why
complicated
the
system,
system
a
was
complex
racist was simply
system
its origins.
that you can make
And
without
so
having some
in the
sort
new
of
Jim Crow, she
effect
dives
on another
into
Action and reaction.
the origins
That's
of
right,
mass
exactly.
incarceration,
So
wearing a racial
when
lens, which I
we
think
try to
is
have conversations, especially on really bad platforms that aren't designed for good conversations, when we try to have conversations about those sorts of topics, we almost immediately retreat to our camps of what we believed before we even showed up to the convo.
Wow.
Like really hard, right? You feel me? So like, it's really hard to change someone's mind online when you're talking about a topic like this. But it's really easy to slide down a wormhole and a rabbit hole into more conspiratorial territory on platforms like those. That's like what they're designed to do.
I think you
Definitely.
yeah.
Okay.
I think you hit a really a great point there because during the George Floyd when rest in peace George Floyd, when that incident happened, Facebook was so toxic. You couldn't make a post without someone trying to say something against you. And at that moment, I had to like leave Facebook because of just everyone just trying to get at you, right? Um, how? Because I think you touched a little bit on it, but I kind of want you to kind of give us simple like examples. How can people have intelligent conversations, or what are ways that people can start having intelligent conversations and actionable things, not just talking about it, but actionable things to make people understand what is actually going on?
I think there are a few ways to have intelligent conversations about this. One way is to look into the academic side of mass incarceration. There are a lot of studies that prove that mass incarceration is stupid and that it's especially harmful for people who are living with mental illnesses, for people who are living with substance use disorders or addictions, usually both at the same time, and and then more dangerous for people who are Black and brown and undocumented, right? So there's plenty of research, but this is part of the messaging problem that a lot of organizations have, is that we're talking about an incredibly difficult subject with and only using academic terms and statistics, but stats don't move our heart, right? They don't. Knowing a statistic doesn't move our heart. And there's actually studies about that too. And how the messaging needs to change from talking about a large problem to shrinking the problem so that it's digestible. So that's the second way to talk about it, is to take the mass out of mass incarceration.
Okay.
Yeah, start telling real stories. Look, 1/3 of our country has been touched by the criminal justice system in some way. 1/3 of us, whether it's a misdemeanor or we've been put on probation or we've been put in prison or we've just been stopped by a cop, 1/3 of us have been touched by this. This is not something that somebody can be totally sheltered from, but it's the type of system that somebody can feel like they've never had any interaction with. And then it will also make that person feel like anybody who does have an interaction with that system must be stupid, must be wrong, must be dangerous, must be a criminal. It's just not true. So taking the mass out of mass incarceration and telling individual stories helps people have the conversation.
Wow, that's dynamic. Caleb, you want to add something?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. When you broke it down as far as the lens, a lot of people are saying the mass, but talk about the incarceration. So that automatically leads me to the lens, which is perspective. When a lot of people just having, like I said, not the focus point, and their mind is on a lot of things. When you're actually focused on this lens and this perspective, you also understand these key stories that can be able to move people. And I do agree with what you're saying. And also wanted to add in another part where you're talking about the origins of it all. You mentioned back to the racial profiling, and I can even go back further than that in the beginning with the Native Americans as well, as far as them not having the ability to have a lawyer in court. I mean, it's just time after time, the system has complex ways of handling situations. And I'm glad that you're in this niche. I'm glad that you're in this industry. So we can click the notifications when you drop a video, you know, so we can stay up to date with the movement you're heading down for.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, I think if you draw the line far enough back, you won't skip any spaces going from 2021 mass incarceration and now parole, so supervision in 2021, all the way back to basically Jamestown in the 1600s. You can do that, and it's not a stretch to do that. I've written before that the first mass incarceration in what became the U.S. was of the native population, the indigenous population.
Right.
The first Black slave that was brought here landed actually in Florida. Not the first documented one, but he was owned by a Spaniard, right? So that's why it's not really kept in our history. It's not really considered the star of the nation because Spain didn't really do anything down there that led to where we are now. But then when you get to the first folks to step off of the boat and they didn't want to be there, right? We can trace it all the way back to that. This is, especially from an economic standpoint, okay? Because we have to take ourselves back to the mindset of many of the people back then. They were holding racist ideas sometimes without knowing that they were racist, sometimes. And we still do this today. It's part of the human condition. But they would look at Africans as property. We know this, right? But this might be hard to believe, but in some of their minds, they still didn't look at that person as lesser because it wasn't a person. So there was like this distance in some of their minds, but that was the second mass incarceration in what became the US and was the most effective form of mass incarceration until the Black codes came and we started criminalizing behaviors of particularly Black people who weren't given opportunities to work, who weren't given opportunities to own homes, who were failed by the federal government and their state governments after emancipation, after Reconstruction folded, after angry, mostly poor white people started burning down anything that Black people would build in terms of economic wealth, in terms of neighborhoods, businesses, you name it.
Black Wall Street.
Exactly. So what started happening was we started to see the over-criminalization of Blackness at that point, but they would go around the Blackness. They'd say, oh, you're loitering, or, oh, you're vagrant. Well, the vast majority of those people who happened to be that way, that they were pulling in, were Black people who were promised jobs, promised 40 acres, promised land, and they didn't get it. So that was the beginning of that. And then we started to see the introduction of sharecropping, which if you look at the pictures, this is one of the most fascinating parts of that history to me is you look at the pictures following Reconstruction of sharecroppers, and you look at the pictures of when they were enslaved, and they look exactly the same. And then in the sharecropping era, when there were more Black men starting to get incarcerated, that's when the pictures started looking different because they were wearing stripes. But the faces transferred. It looked like they just switched costumes. You know what I mean? So what we have today, this form of mass incarceration and the way that people get to it is not some distant relative of slavery. It's a direct descendant.
Because I also remember, wasn't it supposed to be 3/5? That was written in the Constitution. Was it 3/5 of it? I'm not sure if you can.
Sorry, Caleb. Say that again. You were cutting out.
I'm not sure if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it you remember mentioning that the Black man was property, and I believe if not in the Constitution, was 3/5 of a man?
Yeah, that's in Jay-Z's lyric, right?
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, so that law essentially, essentially that was part of a compromise.
Mm.
Um, and it mostly had to do with who could vote,
Mm.
right? So that became part of a system that was designed to not so delicately keep people out of the process. And so when they started qualifying somebody as 3/5 of a man, um, that was their way of doing that.
Now, what do you think about when history is jaded, when history is not fully expressed, when some part of history is kind of cut short to make something look different?
Ooh.
What do you think about that?
First of all, I think we get worse stories.
Mm.
Just from like a storytelling standpoint, like usually the truest story is the best version of the story.
Yes.
And I guess there was a time in our country's evolution where they found more joy in crafting these wild heroic narratives of pure people.
Mm.
And we're still living with that relic today. To me, that's not even fun. Like, because I can't identify with a perfect person, right? Like, there's nothing within me that can identify with the traditional version of Thomas Jefferson that we have, right? Like, staying up late at night, completely disciplined with a quill pen, writing what will eventually be the most famous document in the world. Like, fuck, sorry, like that. I can't identify with that,
Yeah.
but I can identify with a very flawed, complicated person who owned slaves. I mean, I can't identify with owning slaves, but I can identify with the complexities of that. I can identify with the compartmentalization that he had to do in his mind, knowing that he had a black child, yet still wouldn't consider them to be part of the group of people who benefited from the system he was creating. I can identify with that,
Wow.
right?
That's
Anybody could. We don't need perfect heroes. We don't need the ideal person.
Mm.
I think stories are more fun when they're real. So that's the first thing that I think we sacrifice.
Wow. Wow. You just dug us into history. Like we are like zoom right into history, man. This is history 101 right here.
for real.
Let's switch gears a little bit because when I went to your website, there's an article you got where you guys talk about Blockbusting. Can you talk about that a little bit? Tell people what that means.
So is this mostly a Kansas City audience or are we all over the country?
Right now, it's mostly Kansas City audience, but we can get people from all over the world too.
I believe that. So every time somebody goes down to the plaza in Kansas City, they're stepping on a piece of history. Not only was it one of the first shopping centers that you could drive through, it was also one of the best examples of how to use real estate to segregate and divide.
Correct.
So if you were down at the plaza and you're down at that fountain and you go, all of a sudden things look different. Not just like a little bit different, but like very different to the point where if it's your first time seeing it, you will step back and you'll just kind of look around and be like, how far away are we from this plaza?
Yes.
One of the ways that divide happened from west to east was through blockbusting. Blockbusting was one of the many techniques that was used in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s to move residents from one neighborhood out of that neighborhood and move another set of residents into that neighborhood so that they can be taken advantage of. And that population was our black population. Now, what's interesting, if we do have a worldwide audience, if you come to the US, any city that's about the same size as Kansas City will have a dividing line, like the line that I just told you about, which is truced. Ours runs north-south. And everybody in that city, if they've ever touched their dividing line, knows the name of it. Usually it has MLK Jr.'s name on it. That's one of the most unfortunate aspects of it. But
Wow.
the reason why those major cities are structured like that, one of the reasons why, was because the person who did that in Kansas City was eventually recognized at a very, very high level and asked to coordinate the development of high or like luxury neighborhoods, upper middle class neighborhoods around the country. And that man's name was J.C. Nichols. So when we're talking about specifically in Kansas City, there's this incredible irony that all of our Black Lives Matter protests, racial injustice protests happen at this man's fountain. And I'm definitely an advocate now of changing the fountain's name, which I think they did. They stripped the name of that fountain from J.C. Nichols Fountain to I think the Plaza Fountain or something. But this isn't unique to Kansas City. It just happened to be almost perfected in Kansas City. Now, so for blockbusting, okay. So what I just described was more redlining.
Yes.
So what I described was more redlining.
Wow.
Right. Redlining gets its name from the moments in time when a real estate agent would be sitting down with a couple of people who want to own homes.
Also,
And
we do have a few minutes left towards the end of the show.
go in. So this was when somebody would sit down with somebody who wanted to own a home, and depending on what they looked like, what pigment was in their skin, they would take out this little marker and they'd say, you know what, I think you want to go over here or over here. And the marker was red a lot of times, and so people would call that redlining. So blockbusting was more of like the on the ground version of how the neighborhoods happened. So redlining was kind of high level. Blockbusting was, well, how do we even have the homes available over on our east side, right? And so there were a variety of ways of blockbusting. One of the most notorious in Kansas City was done by a guy named Bob Woodward, I think. And he pulled some sleazy tactics, bros. Like there's this one story, since we're talking about mass incarceration, there's this one story of him going to this white neighborhood, middle class neighborhood, never living life. And this guy would show up in this suit, and behind him would be a guy who just got out of the Bing, who just got out of prison. Big, tough black dude, right? He'd pay him for the day, feed him, and say, just walk behind me, okay? You don't got to say nothing. And he would go up to these houses. Yes, so Jamal is looking to move in down the street, and we just wondered if we could learn a little bit more about the neighborhood from your perspective.
Wow. That's ultimate blockbusting.
That's ultimate blockbusting. Now, here's the financial portion of it.
Wow.
So they would leave. Those two people would like Woodward or his agent, and then the person would leave. Another person would come back around. Sometimes it was the same agent, but another person would show up and say, hey, you've heard what's going on in this neighborhood. You don't want to go through that. We actually got some properties that you can look at over here.
Wow.
Yep.
They would leave. Now, this is where the trap begins. Okay, so that's how the white flight begins, but here's how the trap begins. They do find black families. Now, this time, there weren't a lot of black families who had been home owners. Mortgages are a little bit different to understand than rental, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this big population of renters, and they're given this opportunity to finally own a home. And so they sit down, they say, look, here's a nice home with other people who look like you around you. Going to be good. Now you need some financing. So we're going to give you some financing. So that means that they put them in debt right away. So they're in debt, they move into the house, and then they can't pay back the money. But that money was federally insured. So the same company that scared white people away and moved an undereducated family into that house when it comes to home ownership, and who gave them the money to finance it, are actually not losing any money at all. because they're getting reimbursed by the government at that time. And so that family would leave, the house would go into a degraded position, blight. And because the rules at the time were the way they were at the federal level, if that company was receiving reimbursement from money that they didn't collect from the homeowner, then they also couldn't move another family in for a certain period of time. And that's when we started to see the empty houses that started to fall apart and depress the values across the board in communities like the East Side all over the country.
Wow. I am mind blown, man.
Amazing.
Thank you for coming on this show. That's all I can say. I've been educated right now because, I've heard so much about redlining on truths, but I have not really had this in-depth conversation about it. And I think everyone needs to hear this story because, it's one thing to hear a couple stories, but then have someone in-depthly kind of educate you on the matter. Man, this is great. Now we'll come to the end of the show. Unfortunately, I really want to stay here and talk like all day because I'm learning so much right now. But last question for you is, what are some projects you're working on right now, and how can people help and be able to work with you in what you're doing right now?
So we're working on a lot of things. So the best way to check out what we're doing on a daily basis is to go to our website and check out our initiatives tab. The two initiatives that are the primary focus right now, one is called Relentless. So this is launching down in Atlanta. Relentless is a diversion program, which means keeping people out of prison, and a reentry program, so helping people when they get out. We're teaching premier level videography and photography skills to those people. And the vision there is that we get somebody from the system to the set in 60 days or less.
Wow.
So that's happening this year. And we're launching on June 17th, the capital campaign for that, June 17th, 2021. And the reason we're launching on that date is because that's the 50th anniversary of the declaration of the war on drugs, not by Reagan, but by Nixon. Nixon's declaration laid the groundwork for Reagan's real war, which is when we started to see the population of incarcerated people go up. So we're taking the date back.
Okay. Wow.
Wow.
That is phenomenal. Man, definitely, you guys heard him. Definitely check his website out. This is Justin, man. This is awesome, Jay. This is Jay Austin on the FiredUp KC show. You guys know where to find him at. He is the founder of the DWA, an agency that provides fierce guidance for decarceration. Man, I'm thankful for you being here today. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Your message speaks loudly. For those of you who are listening today, please go to the website on the description right here to follow what he's doing and be able to support him. And thank you again for coming on the show, Jay.
Of course, guys.
Appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
For now, I'll say bye-bye and hey, subscribe and do not forget, stay fired up. But for now, bye-bye. Have a good day.